The day my son Gregory told me I had to leave was the same day my oncologist had called to say I was officially in remission. I remember standing in my son's foyer, the home I had helped him buy, clutching my phone with shaking fingers, the doctor's congratulations still ringing in my ears. "Mom, Vanessa and I have been talking," Gregory said, not meeting my eyes, his hand firmly gripping the banister of the staircase I'd climbed countless times to read bedtime stories to my grandchildren. "We think it's time you found your own place. The kids need their playroom back." Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months of chemotherapy, of throwing up in his guest bathroom, of babysitting his children when I could barely stand. And now that I was finally healing, I was inconvenient. I looked at my son, at the boy I had raised alone after his father died, at the man who now wore custom suits and Rolex watches that my decades of hard work had afforded him. And for the first time in my 62 years, I felt something inside me harden into gleaming, perfect resolve. "Of course, dear," I said, smiling as his shoulders visibly relaxed. "I'll be out by the weekend." What my son didn't know, what no one knew, was that Florence Anderson, the retired school librarian who darned her own socks and cut coupons from the Sunday paper, was worth north of $5 million. And I was about to teach my son the most important lesson of his privileged life. I never set out to become wealthy. Growing up in Cedar Mills, a small manufacturing town in upstate New York where the main street consisted of precisely 11 businesses and a post office, wealth seemed as distant as the moon. My father worked at the paper mill, coming home with his fingernails rimmed with pulp no matter how thoroughly he scrubbed them. My mother cleaned houses for the few prosperous families in town. We weren't poor, not quite, but I knew what it meant to stretch a dollar until it cried for mercy. When I married Arthur Anderson at 22, we had precisely $800 between us and a shared belief that hard work and careful planning would eventually yield a comfortable life. Arthur was brilliant with numbers, the kind of man who could solve complex equations in his head faster than most people could punch them into a calculator. He turned that talent into a modest accounting practice while I became a school librarian, a job I adored despite the meager salary. Then came our miracle, Gregory, born after 7 years of trying, of temperatures taken and calendars marked. I would have given him the world if I could. Perhaps in some ways I did, and perhaps that was my first mistake. Arthur died when Gregory was just 7, a sudden heart attack that left me a widow with a child to raise and a mortgage that suddenly seemed insurmountable. The life insurance was enough to pay off the house, but little else. I took on extra work cataloging for the county library system in the evenings after Gregory went to bed, every additional dollar carefully saved for his future. Then came the inheritance that changed everything. My great-aunt Mildred, whom I'd visited faithfully every Sunday throughout my childhood and adult life, left me her entire estate. A modest house in Poughkeepsie, some antique furniture, and, most surprisingly, a portfolio of blue-chip stocks she'd been quietly accumulating since the 1950s. Prudent, frugal Aunt Mildred, who wore the same 3 dresses in rotation for as long as I could remember, turned out to be something of a financial savant. "This is a substantial sum, Mrs. Anderson," the estate lawyer told me, his voice hushed with respect. "With proper management, it could secure your future and your son's education." Proper management became my second job. I read investment books, attended seminars, consulted with financial advisors, but made my own decisions. I lived exactly as I had before, in our modest home, buying store-brand groceries, wearing clothes until they wore out. But I invested wisely, reinvested dividends, and watched as compound interest performed its quiet magic. When Gregory got accepted to Cornell, I paid his tuition in full, bought him a reliable car, and sent him monthly allowances generous enough to ensure he never had to work during the school year. "Focus on your studies," I told him, That's your job right now. He graduated with honors in business administration, and I swelled with pride at the commencement ceremony. My son, who would never know the struggle I had known. My son, who would start his adult life unburdened by debt or financial anxiety. My son, who was already showing signs of forgetting where he came from. Mom, you don't need to save those plastic containers, he'd say, embarrassed when he visited with college friends. Just buy Tupperware. I'd smile and say, old habits die hard, never explaining that my frugality wasn't born of necessity anymore, but of choice, a private discipline that had built an empire hidden behind my modest lifestyle. After graduate school, Gregory landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm in Boston. When he and Vanessa got engaged after a whirlwind courtship, I was cautiously happy for them. She came from money, old money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself but sits comfortably in well-cut clothes and casually mentioned vacation homes. "We've found the perfect house, Mom," Gregory called one evening, his voice electric with excitement. "It's in Newton, great neighborhood, excellent schools. But the down payment." "How much?" I asked, already opening my checkbook. $150,000, he said, then quickly added, "I'll pay you back, of course." I wrote the check without hesitation, knowing I'd never see that money again, and not minding one bit. What was money for, if not to help your child? When they moved in, I gave them another $50,000 as a housewarming gift, earmarked for renovations. They gutted the kitchen first, installing gleaming marble countertops and professional grade appliances that Vanessa, who considered cooking beneath her, rarely used. The bathrooms came next, each one transformed into a spa-like retreat with heated floors and rainfall shower heads. Gregory's home office was paneled in rich mahogany, a faithful recreation of a room he'd seen in a design magazine. I kept my opinions to myself, even when they replaced perfectly good furniture with designer pieces, even when they hired a landscaper to tear out the beautiful old maple tree in the backyard because it blocked the view of their new pool. Their children, my grandchildren Zoe and Caleb, had separate playrooms filled with toys they barely touched, their attention always drawn to the next new thing. I continued living in my modest 3-bedroom home in Cedar Mills, driving my 10-year-old Volvo, shopping at discount grocery stores. The dividends and interest from my investments went straight back into my portfolio, which grew steadily, quietly, as I lived my simple, contented life. Then came the diagnosis. Ovarian cancer, stage 2. The treatment would be aggressive. Surgery, followed by intensive chemotherapy. I sat in my doctor's office, a strange calm settling over me as he explained survival rates and side effects. My first thought wasn't for myself, but for Gregory and the children. "I'd like to be near my family during treatment," I told my oncologist. "My son lives in Newton, Massachusetts. Could you recommend someone there?" Within a week, I had sublet my house to a young professor at the local community college, packed 2 suitcases with essentials, and driven to Boston. I called Gregory from the road. "Mom, what do you mean you're coming here? Today?" His voice held more panic than welcome. "I have cancer, Gregory," I said simply. "I need to be near family while I undergo treatment." There was a long silence. On the line, then a muffled conversation I couldn't quite make out. Gregory and Vanessa, no doubt. "Of course," he finally said. "You can stay in the kids' playroom. We'll move some things around." The playroom turned out to be a converted sun porch off the kitchen, lovely in its way with windows on 3 sides, but hardly private. A futon was hastily assembled, a small dresser cleared for my use. The children's toys remained stacked in corners and piled on shelves. "It's just temporary," Vanessa said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Until you're better." The first rounds of chemotherapy hit me like a freight train. I lost weight, lost hair, lost entire days to nausea and bone-deep fatigue. On good days, I helped with the children, reading to them or supervising quiet activities, while Vanessa attended charity luncheons or met friends for shopping trips. On bad days, I curled on the futon, trying to make myself as small and unobtrusive as possible. Gregory was rarely home, his work schedule increasingly demanding as he pursued a promotion. When he was there, he seemed uncomfortable with my illness, unsure how to interact with this diminished version of his mother. He'd pat my shoulder awkwardly, ask if I needed anything, then retreat to his office or the media room. Vanessa's initial, cool politeness gradually gave way to poorly concealed resentment. My presence disrupted her carefully curated home and routine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evidence of illness, my medications lined up on the bathroom counter, the special protein shakes in the refrigerator, the hospital bed tray I used on particularly bad days, all offended her aesthetic sensibilities. "We're having people over tonight," she informed me one afternoon as I was helping Zoe with a puzzle. "The Wilsons and the Blakes, partner track people from Gregory's firm. Would you mind staying in your room after dinner? These connections are really important for Gregory's career." I nodded, understanding perfectly well what she was really saying. My pale, gaunt appearance would make their guests uncomfortable. I was a reminder of mortality, of illness, of the messy realities of life that didn't belong in their perfect home. The evening of the dinner party, I took extra care with my appearance, putting on the wig I rarely bothered with at home, applying makeup to my hollow cheeks, and dressing in a simple but elegant outfit. When I emerged from the playroom, Vanessa was arranging flowers in the foyer. She froze when she saw me. "Oh," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "You look nice." During dinner, I made an effort to be charming, to ask interested questions about the guests' children and vacations, to laugh at the right moments. Gregory seemed relieved, Vanessa marginally less tense. The women asked polite questions about my recovery, making sympathetic noises at my responses. "Florence is a retired school librarian," Gregory explained when someone asked what I had done before retirement. There was something in his tone, something dismissive, as if apologizing for my ordinary career. "I loved every minute of it," I said, smiling. "There's nothing quite like putting the right book in a child's hands at the right moment." "How sweet," said Mrs. Blake, before turning the conversation back to their recent trip to the Maldives. After dinner, I excused myself as promised, but not before overhearing a snippet of conversation as I walked down the hallway. "Must be difficult having her here during treatment," Mrs. Wilson was saying to Vanessa. "It's challenging," Vanessa replied, her voice lowered but still audible. "The children's playroom, our routine. But family obligations, you know. We can hardly say no." Family obligations, as if I were a burden to be endured rather than a mother fighting for her life. I closed the door to the playroom and sat, on the edge of the futon, too tired suddenly to even change my clothes. The next morning, I made a phone call to my financial advisor. "Helen, it's Florence Anderson. I need to make some arrangements." Over the next few months, as I endured the final rounds of chemotherapy and began the slow process of recovery, I quietly set certain wheels in motion. The sublet on my house in Cedar Mills ended, but I didn't return. Instead, I authorized Helen to hire a service to pack up my belongings and place them in storage. "What about your house, Flo?" Helen asked. "Sell it," I said, surprising myself, with the decisiveness in my voice. It's time for a change. My health improved incrementally. Hair began to grow back, silver white and surprisingly curly. I gained a few pounds. My energy returned, not in a flood, but in small, daily increases. I began taking the children to the nearby park while Vanessa was out, establishing a ritual of stopping for ice cream on the way home, something I could see irritated her when they chattered about it at dinner. "All that sugar right before dinner," she would say with a tight smile. "They'll spoil their appetite." But I noticed something else too, something that became clearer as my health improved. Gregory and Vanessa were struggling financially. The signs were subtle but unmistakable. To someone who had spent a lifetime being careful with money, credit card bills left open on the office desk showing near maximum balances, hushed, tense conversations about the cost of private school tuition, a leak in the master bathroom left unrepaired for weeks, Gregory's increasing work hours, the dark circles under his eyes. I considered offering help. I had more than enough to clear their debts and set them on solid footing. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the way Vanessa had begun sighing heavily whenever I entered a room. Perhaps it was how Gregory couldn't quite meet my eyes when he spoke to me. Or perhaps it was simply time for a different kind of lesson than the ones I'd been teaching my son all his life. The call from my oncologist came on a Tuesday morning. 6 months of aggressive treatment had worked. I was officially in remission. I sat on the futon, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down my face, when Gregory came home unexpectedly at lunchtime. He seemed surprised to find me crying. "Mom? What's wrong? Is it bad news?" I shook my head, wiping my eyes. "The opposite. I'm in remission." His face broke into a genuine smile, the first I'd seen in months. He hugged me, awkwardly but sincerely. "That's fantastic news. We should celebrate. I'll pick up something special for dinner." But by evening, something had changed. Gregory was subdued during the meal, exchanging glances with Vanessa. After the children were in bed, they invited me to join them in the living room. That's when Gregory told me it was time to find my own place, now that I was better. "We've been happy to have you during your treatment," Vanessa added, not sounding happy at all. "But the children really do need their playroom back, and I'm sure you want your independence again." I nodded, that new, hard resolve forming inside me. "Of course, I understand completely. I'll be out by the weekend." "There's no rush," Gregory said quickly, looking relieved at my easy acquiescence. "Take the time you need to find somewhere suitable." Suitable, as if I were an old shoe that needed to be properly stored away. "That's very considerate," I said pleasantly. "But I've actually been making plans for a while now. I've sold my house in Cedar Mills." This caught their attention. Gregory looked concerned. "You sold the house? Where will you go?" I smiled. "I've been thinking about that. At my age, I don't want the responsibility of maintaining a house anymore. I'm looking at apartments, something simple and manageable." "In Newton?" Vanessa asked, alarm creeping into her voice at the thought of me remaining nearby. "I'm not sure yet," I said vaguely. "I'm keeping my options open." The next morning, I called a real estate agent recommended by Helen and arranged to see several rental properties. By Thursday, I had signed a 6-month lease on a small but elegant apartment in a doorman building in Back Bay, Boston, not the modest accommodation Gregory and Vanessa were likely expecting. On Saturday morning, a moving truck arrived at their house. Gregory came out to the driveway, coffee in hand, looking confused. "I thought you said you put your things in storage," he said. "Just temporarily," I replied, "but now they're going to my new place." He watched as the movers brought in 2 suitcases and a few boxes, all I had with me in Newton. It would take less than an hour to complete the job. "Do you need help getting settled?" he asked, obligation rather than genuine desire in his voice. "No, thank you. I've hired people to help with that." I handed him a slip of paper. "Here's my new address and phone number." He glanced at it, his eyes widening slightly at the prestigious address. "Back Bay? Mom, that's an expensive area." I patted his arm. "Don't worry about me. I've always been careful with money." As the movers finished loading my meager possessions, I knelt to hug Zoe and Caleb goodbye, promising to see them soon. Rising, I faced my son and daughter-in-law. "Thank you for opening your home to me during my treatment," I said sincerely. "I'm grateful for the time with you and the children." Gregory had the grace to look slightly ashamed. Vanessa merely nodded, already mentally redecorating the playroom. I climbed into my old Volvo, another thing that had embarrassed them, I knew, and drove away from the house my money had helped buy, leaving behind the son who had forgotten the value of kindness and the woman who had never known it at all. My new apartment was on the 8th floor of a pre-war building with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and a small balcony overlooking the Charles River. It was partially furnished, which suited me fine. I had plans to select new pieces at my leisure. For now, it was clean, bright, and mine. As I unpacked the few personal items I'd brought to Gregory's, photographs, books, the quilt my grandmother had made, I felt lighter than I had in months. The cancer was in remission. I was starting fresh, and I was about to embark on a new chapter that neither my son nor his wife could possibly anticipate. That evening, I opened my laptop and sent an email to Helen. "Time to implement Phase 2, I wrote. "Let's meet on Monday to finalize everything." Then I walked out onto my balcony, watching as the sunset painted the river in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt purely, simply happy. Whatever happened next would unfold according to choices, mine, and those of the people who had revealed their true character when I needed them most. I smiled into the gathering darkness. Gregory had no idea what was coming. And for now, that was exactly as it should be. On Monday morning, I woke before my alarm, the pale spring sunlight filtering through curtains I hadn't yet replaced. For a moment, I lay still, savoring the silence. No sounds of children running down hallways, no Vanessa's performatively hushed voice on early morning calls, no sense of being an unwelcome guest in a space that never quite became mine. Just peace. My own breath, the distant hum of the city waking, the occasional call of a gull from the river. My appointment with Helen wasn't until 11, which gave me ample time to establish a new morning routine. I brewed coffee, real coffee, from freshly ground beans, not the pod machine Vanessa insisted was just as good, and carried my cup to the balcony. Below, joggers traced paths along the river, their breath clouding in the cool air. A rowing team glided across the water, oars moving in perfect synchrony. I had never lived in a city center before, and I found myself unexpectedly charmed by the energy of it, the sense of purpose in the air. By 10:30, I was dressed in a simple but well-cut navy pantsuit I'd purchased years ago for special occasions, at the library. It still fit, though a bit loosely after my illness. I'd paired it with a silk scarf to add some color near my face and to disguise the lingering thinness of my neck. A touch of makeup, small pearl earrings, and comfortable but elegant flats completed the look. I studied myself in the mirror, seeing not the poor Florence who had occupied the playroom at Gregory's house, but a woman of substance preparing for an important meeting. The offices of Westlake Financial Advisors occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek tower in the financial district. The reception area, all polished wood and soft lighting, conveyed exactly the right balance of prosperity and discretion. The young woman at the desk greeted me by name before I could introduce myself. "Mrs. Anderson, welcome. Ms. Carson is expecting you. May I offer you something to drink while you wait?" "Just water, thank you," I replied, settling into one of the comfortable chairs in the waiting area. I'd been a client of Westlake for nearly 2 decades, ever since my portfolio had grown too complex for me to manage alone. But I'd always dealt with Helen by phone, or in occasional meetings in Cedar Mills when she happened to be in the area. This was my first visit to the company's headquarters. I barely had time to sip my water before Helen appeared, striding across the reception area with hand extended, her characteristic energy filling the space. At 50-something, Helen Carson was what my mother would have called a handsome woman, tall, athletic, with short silver hair and keen blue eyes that missed nothing. "Florence," she said warmly, clasping my hand in both of hers. "It's wonderful." to see you looking so well." "Cancer becomes me," I replied with a small smile. "Or perhaps it's just the freedom of fresh starts." Helen's eyes crinkled with understanding. "Let's talk in my office. We have a lot to cover." She led me down a corridor to a corner office with windows on two sides offering spectacular views of the harbor. On her desk, alongside the expected computer and neatly arranged files, stood a single photograph in a silver frame. Helen with a woman about her age and two teenage boys, all grinning in hiking gear against a backdrop of mountains. "My family," Helen said, noticing my glance. "Rachel and our sons, Eli and Isaac." I smiled, appreciating this glimpse into her personal life after so many years of professional relationship. "They look happy." "They are. We are." She gestured to a seating area by the windows, where a sideboard held a carafe of water and a plate of small pastries. "Shall we?" Once settled, Helen opened a leather portfolio and laid several documents on the coffee table between us. "I've prepared everything as discussed. Are you certain you want to proceed with all of this? It's quite a statement." I nodded. "I've had 6 months of treatment to think about it, Helen. 6 months of watching my son and his wife while they thought I was too sick or too preoccupied to notice their true characters. I'm very certain." She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded briskly. "Very well. Let's start with your updated will and trust documents." For the next hour, we went through the details of my new estate plan. The bulk of my fortune would bypass Gregory entirely, instead flowing into trusts for Zoe and Caleb, accessible only when they turned 30, with additional funds released if they completed college degrees. A significant portion, nearly $1 million, would be donated to cancer research and to establish a literacy foundation in my name. My modest personal effects and a small cash bequest would go to Gregory. "And you're sure about this condition?" Helen asked, tapping a paragraph. "On the 3rd page." "Absolutely," I said. "It's not punitive, Helen. It's an opportunity for growth." She looked skeptical, but continued. "Next, the property purchase. The closing is scheduled for next week. It's fully furnished as requested, though you may want to make some personal changes. The condo association has already approved your application." She handed me a folder containing photographs and details of what would be my new permanent home. A spacious 3-bedroom condominium in a historic building just blocks from my temporary apartment. The previous owner, a retired surgeon relocating to Arizona, had decorated it with understated elegance, much to my taste. The purchase price, just under $2 million, would barely dent my capital. "And what about the business proposal?" I asked. Helen smiled, her enthusiasm showing through her professional demeanor. "That's the most exciting part, in my opinion. The location is perfect. A storefront in a mixed-use building in Cambridge, near enough to several colleges to attract the right clientele, but not so close to existing competitors that you'll struggle to establish yourself." She pulled out a business plan she'd helped me develop. Fabled Pages would be a boutique bookstore specializing in classic literature, poetry, and carefully curated modern fiction. It would feature a small cafe area, comfortable reading nooks, and a children's section designed to delight young readers. A portion of the inventory would be dedicated to first editions and collectible books, an investment as much as inventory. "I've never run a retail business," I admitted, a flutter of uncertainty in my stomach. "That's why we're budgeting for an experienced manager and adequate staff," Helen reminded me. "You'll be the owner and creative director, but not solely responsible for daily operations. It's a passion project with a solid business foundation, not a second career." I nodded, excitement slowly replacing apprehension. A bookstore had been a decades-old dream, one I'd set aside for practicality's sake while raising Gregory. Now, with financial security and a fresh start, why not pursue it? "When can we start the hiring process?" I asked. "I've already engaged a headhunting firm specializing in independent bookstore management. They've identified several promising candidates. Helen glanced at her watch. In fact, I've arranged for you to meet one of them after our lunch, if you're feeling up to it. Lunch? Helen smiled. I took the liberty of making a reservation at Sorellina. I thought we should celebrate your new beginning. 2 hours later, pleasantly full from an exquisite Italian meal and energized by an engaging conversation with Miranda Chen, the frontrunner for the store manager position, I decided to walk partway back to my apartment. The day had turned mild, and I found myself enjoying the simple pleasure of movement after months of illness-imposed limitation. I paused at the public garden, finding an empty bench near the swan boats. Watching families and couples stroll by, I tried to imagine what Gregory was doing at that moment. Working in his mahogany-paneled home office? Meeting clients? Had he even thought about me since I'd left 2 days ago? The pain of his rejection was still fresh, a bruise I couldn't help but press. I had given him everything I could: love, opportunity, financial support, and somehow raised a man who could tell his mother she was inconvenient the very day she learned her cancer was in remission. My phone chimed with a text message. I expected Helen with some follow-up from our meeting, but instead saw it was from Zoe, my 9-year-old granddaughter. Gregory and Vanessa had reluctantly allowed the children to have limited messaging capabilities on their tablets, primarily to communicate with friends from school. Zoe occasionally sent me sweet random observations or questions. "Grandma, when can I see your new house? Dad says it's fancy." I smiled, imagining Gregory's discomfort when Zoe asked about me. Had he driven past my building? Looked up typical? Rents in the area? "Soon, sweetheart," I texted back. "I'm still getting settled. How about we meet for ice cream this weekend? I'll ask your parents." The reply came quickly. "Yes, the usual place. Don't tell Caleb yet, he's being annoying." I promised to keep it between us for now and returned the phone to my purse. My spirits lifted. Whatever Gregory and Vanessa's failings, my grandchildren were delights. Curious, kind, and unspoiled at their core despite their privileged upbringing. My revised estate plan would ensure they had both security and incentive to develop their best qualities. That evening, I called Gregory's cell phone, purposely timing it for when I knew he'd likely be commuting home. "Mom? Is everything okay?" His voice held more surprise than concern. "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I've settled into my apartment quite nicely. I was wondering if I might take Zoe and Caleb for ice cream this weekend." "Oh." He sounded caught off guard by the ordinary nature of the request. "I suppose that would be fine. Saturday afternoon. Vanessa's taking them to some birthday party in the morning." "Perfect," I said. "I'll pick them up around 2 if that works." "Pick them up? Mom, your car is—" He stopped abruptly. "Is what?" I prompted, knowing exactly what he'd been about to say. He sighed. "Nothing. It's fine. 2 o'clock Saturday." I ended the call with a small smile. He'd been about to comment on my old Volvo, to suggest it wasn't reliable or perhaps not nice enough to be seen in his neighborhood. Little did he know that was another thing about to change. Friday morning found me at a luxury car dealership in Watertown, where I traded in my faithful Volvo for a sleek Audi Q5 in deep blue. It was the most extravagant purchase I'd made for myself in decades, and I felt a momentary pang of my old frugality as I signed the paperwork. But as I settled into the driver's seat, inhaling the scent of new leather and running my hands over the smooth steering wheel, I decided some luxuries were worth savoring. My next stop was a high-end department store, where I purchased several new outfits, not flashy or overly expensive, but well-made pieces in good fabrics that fit my still slender frame properly. The sales associate, a woman about my age with impeccable style, took one look at me and seemed to understand immediately what I needed. "Cancer?" she asked quietly as she helped me select a silk blouse that brought color to my face. I nodded, surprised by her directness. 5 years in remission myself, she explained, gesturing to her short-cropped hair, now more stylish than necessary. The recovery wardrobe is important. You're not the same person you were before. No, I agreed. I'm not. By the time I left the store, I had a wardrobe that reflected who I was becoming rather than who I'd been. The woman in the mirror looked confident, put together, and yes, prosperous. Not ostentatious, never that, but no longer hiding her light under a bushel of false modesty. Saturday arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for an ice cream outing. At precisely 2 o'clock, I pulled up in front of Gregory's house in my new car. Before I could even ring the bell, the front door flew open and Zoe burst out, her brother trailing more sedately behind her. "Grandma!" she shouted, then stopped short, staring at the Audi. "Whose car is that?" "Mine," I said simply. "Do you like it?" "It's awesome," Caleb said with the solemn authority of a 7-year-old boy who had already developed strong opinions about automobiles. "Way better than your old car." Gregory appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of confusion and something else. Wariness, perhaps. "Mom? Is that your car?" "Just picked it up yesterday," I said brightly. The Volvo served me well, but it was time for something new. He walked down the steps, trying and failing to look casual as he circled the vehicle. "This is a current year model," he said. "Brand new," I confirmed. I thought I'd treat myself. Cancer has a way of clarifying priorities. His brow furrowed, but before he could formulate a response, Vanessa appeared beside him. "Oh," she said, taking in the car and my appearance. "You're looking recovered." I smiled pleasantly. Amazing what peace of mind can do for one's health. Shall we have the children back by dinner time? Vanessa nodded stiffly. Gregory still seemed to be processing the sight of his coupon-clipping mother with a luxury car and new clothes. I helped the children buckle into the back seat, waved cheerfully, and drove away, leaving my son and his wife standing in the driveway, nonplussed. The afternoon with Zoe and Caleb was pure joy. We started with ice cream, as promised, then wandered through the public garden, fed the ducks, and rode the swan boats. The children chattered about school, friends, and the minutiae of their lives, while I listened with genuine interest. Unlike their parents, they hadn't seemed to find my presence during cancer treatment burdensome. Rather, they'd often sought me out, bringing books for me to read to them, or simply curling up beside me on the futon during my better days. "Grandma," Zoe said as we walked back to the car, her small hand in mine, "why did you move out? Don't you like living with us?" I chose my words carefully. I loved spending time with you and Caleb, but grown-ups need their own spaces sometimes, just like you like having your own rooms. "Dad said you needed independence," Caleb offered, skipping ahead and then circling back. But Zoe heard Mom say it was a relief to have the playroom back. I felt a flicker of anger at Vanessa's callousness, but kept my expression neutral. "Everyone's happy with the new arrangement," I said lightly. "And now you can visit me in my new place. Would you like to see it before we head back?" Their enthusiastic response settled the matter. I drove to my temporary apartment, feeling a small thrill of anticipation at their reaction. As expected, they were impressed by the doorman who greeted me by name, the marble-floored lobby, and the view from my balcony. "This is way nicer than our house," Caleb declared, pressing his nose against the window to look at the river below. "Different, not better," I corrected gently. "And this is just temporary. I'm buying a permanent place nearby." "You're buying an apartment?" Zoe asked, her eyes wide. "Like, forever?" "A condominium," I explained. "Like an apartment, but I'll own it instead of renting." "Can we have our own rooms there?" Caleb wanted to know. "For when we visit." The question touched me. "I think that could be arranged," I said. "The new place has 3 bedrooms." Does Dad know you're rich now? Zoe asked with a child's directness. I laughed, startled by the question. What makes you think I'm rich? She gestured around the apartment. This place is fancy, and your new car, and your pretty new clothes. Hannah's grandma got rich when her grandpa died, and she moved to a fancy place and bought a convertible and got all new clothes. I'm not exactly rich, I said, carefully. I've been fortunate with some investments, and I've always been careful with money. This explanation seemed to satisfy them, though I suspected Zoe, perceptive as always, didn't entirely believe me. As promised, I had them home by dinner time, declining Gregory's perfunctory invitation to join them. Another time, I said. I have plans this evening. It wasn't entirely a fabrication. I did have plans. They simply involved a quiet dinner alone and finalizing the last details for the bookstore lease I would sign on Monday. But the hint of a social life clearly intrigued Gregory, who wasn't used to thinking of his mother as having an independent existence. Plans? He echoed. With friends or? I merely smiled. Enjoy your dinner. The children were wonderful company. As I drove away, I caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror, standing in the driveway looking after me with an expression I couldn't quite define. A mixture of confusion, suspicion, and perhaps the dawning realization that he didn't know his mother nearly as well as he thought he did. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. I closed on the condominium and began the process of making it my own, keeping most of the previous owner's elegant furniture, but adding personal touches, art I loved, a few cherished items from storage, new bedding, and kitchen essentials. The bookstore project advanced rapidly, with Miranda proving to be an exceptional manager even before we officially opened. Together, we finalized inventory selections, cafe suppliers, and store layout. I had dinner with Gregory, Vanessa, and the children exactly once during this period. A somewhat strained affair at their home, where Vanessa's curiosity about my sudden financial comfort, her exact words, warred with her desire to maintain the fiction that she'd never found me burdensome. The apartment in Back Bay must be expensive, she observed over dessert. And now you're buying a condo? I've always been practical with money, I replied, the same explanation I'd given Zoe. And without a mortgage or car payment for many years, I was able to save more than you might think. Gregory studied me with narrowed eyes. Your investments must have done exceptionally well. I smiled. Better than expected, yes. The children blessedly changed the subject by asking when they could see my new, real home, and if they could help with the bookstore. I promised to have them over once I was fully settled, inwardly amused by Vanessa's poorly concealed horror at the thought of her children working in retail, even as a diversion. The grand opening of Fabled Pages was scheduled for a Saturday in late June, deliberately chosen to coincide with the start of summer reading programs. I had sent formal invitations to Gregory's family along with personal notes for Zoe and Caleb, promising special roles for them at the event. The night before the opening, I stood in the center of the finished store, taking in the realization of my decades-old dream. Gleaming wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with carefully selected books arranged by theme rather than strict alphabetical order. Comfortable armchairs and reading lamps created inviting nooks throughout the space. The children's section featured a mural of a magical forest with quotes from beloved stories hidden among the trees and animals. The cafe area, separated by glass panels etched with literary quotes, offered the aroma of excellent coffee and fresh pastries. Miranda joined me, clipboard in hand as always. Everything's ready, she reported. Staff is fully trained. Inventory is complete. The sound system is tested, and the caterers will arrive at noon tomorrow. It's perfect, Florence. It is, isn't it? I said softly, emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I never thought I'd actually do this. Miranda, not normally demonstrative, squeezed my shoulder. Well, you did, and it's going to be a success. The opening day dawned clear and warm. I dressed carefully in a sage green linen dress that complemented my now silver-white hair, which had grown out into a stylish bob. A simple gold necklace, comfortable but elegant sandals, and light makeup completed the look of a woman who knew exactly who she was. Not a retiree clinging to youth, but someone embracing her age with confidence and style. By the time I arrived, at the store, a small line had already formed outside. The local newspaper had run a feature on the opening, highlighting both the unique concept and my story as a cancer survivor embarking on a new chapter. Several regular customers from the coffee shop next door had become interested during the renovation and promised to be first in line. Miranda and the staff were making final preparations, arranging refreshments and checking that everything was in place. At precisely noon, I unlocked the front door to applause from the waiting crowd. A woman from the Chamber of Commerce presented me with a ceremonial first dollar framed for display. Local business owners offered welcome gifts, and customers began browsing immediately, many leaving with purchases as well as the complimentary bookmarks and tote bags we offered as opening day specials. The children's storytelling session, scheduled for 2 o'clock, was fully booked. I had engaged a professional storyteller who arrived in character as a wizard, complete with robes and a staff, much to the delight of the young audience. Zoe and Caleb, proudly wearing junior bookseller badges I'd had made specially for them, helped hand out activity sheets and stickers. Gregory and Vanessa arrived during this event, hovering awkwardly at the periphery while their children participated enthusiastically. I greeted them warmly but briefly, occupied with introducing the storyteller and making sure everything ran smoothly. I could feel them taking in the store, the customers, the obvious success of the enterprise, and I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction at their visible bewilderment. When there was finally a lull around 4 o'clock, Gregory approached me near the register area, where I was chatting with a customer about first editions. "Mom," he said when the customer had moved away, "can we talk for a minute?" I nodded, leading him to a quiet corner where 2 armchairs were positioned beside a window overlooking a small courtyard. Vanessa was occupied in the cafe area, making a show of examining the pastry selection while clearly eavesdropping. "This is incredible," Gregory began, gesturing around the store. "But I don't understand. When did you plan this?" I supplied. "I've wanted to open a bookstore since before you were born, Gregory." The timing finally felt right. "But the investment, this must have cost—" He shook his head, bewilderment evident in his expression. "Mom, where did all this money come? From suddenly?" I regarded my son calmly. "It's not sudden, Gregory. I've had resources for many years. I simply chose not to flaunt them." "Resources," he repeated. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I made choices about how to live and how to manage what I had," I said. "Just as you've made your choices." His face flushed. "If you had all this money, why did you live so frugally? Why did you drive that old car and cut coupons and wear the same clothes for years?" "Because things aren't what matter most," I said simply, "and I wanted to help you get established without creating dependence." "Dependence?" he echoed, his flush deepening. "So the house, the down payment, that was some kind of test?" "Not at all," I said. "That was a gift, freely given, just like my love for you has always been freely given. But how people respond to gifts says a lot about their character, don't you think?" He stiffened, understanding the implicit criticism. "If you're referring to the guest room situation—" "Playroom," I corrected quietly. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We always planned for you to have your own place once you recovered. It's healthier for everyone that way." "Yes," I agreed. "It certainly is healthier for me." Before he could respond, Zoe bounded over, her junior bookseller badge slightly askew on her dress. "Grandma, can I show some kids the special books in the glass case? The really old ones?" "Of course," I smiled. But remember, we look with our eyes, not our hands, for those particular books. She nodded solemnly and dashed off. Gregory watched her go, then turned back to me. "How much?" he asked abruptly. "I beg your pardon?" "How much money do you actually have, Mom?" I regarded him steadily. "That's not a question I'm going to answer, Gregory. But I will tell you this. I have enough. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Enough to pursue dreams I deferred while raising you. Enough to ensure Zoe and Caleb will have educational opportunities and a start in life when the time comes." His expression changed, calculation replacing confusion. "You're changing your will." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I've updated my estate plans to reflect my current priorities, yes." Before he could press further, Miranda approached with a local reporter who wanted a quote for a follow-up story. I excused myself, leaving Gregory to process this new understanding of his mother, and perhaps, though I didn't hold out much hope, to reflect on his own behavior. By closing time at 8 o'clock, we had exceeded our sales projections for the day by nearly 40%. The store had been constantly busy, with many customers promising to return. The children's event had been a particular success, with parents booking subsequent storytelling sessions before they left. Even the cafe had performed beyond expectations, running out of several pastry varieties by mid-afternoon. After the last customer departed, I gathered the staff for a toast with champagne, sparkling cider for those who didn't drink alcohol. "To fabled pages," I said, raising my glass. "May it be the beginning of many new stories." There were cheers and congratulations, a few impromptu speeches from staff members expressing their excitement about being part of the venture, and then everyone dispersed to their evening plans, leaving Miranda and me to lock up. "You did it," she said, clinking her glass against mine in a private toast. "How does it feel?" I considered the question, looking around at the space that had transformed from lifelong dream to tangible reality in just a few short months. "It feels like possibility," I said finally. "Like I've opened a door I didn't know was there, and there's a whole world beyond it." Miranda smiled. "That's what books do too." "Yes," I agreed. "Exactly like that." After she left, I took a final walk through the store, straightening a few books, adjusting a lamp, savoring the quiet after the day's excitement. My phone chimed with a text message from Gregory. "We need to talk. Properly. Soon." I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. There would be time for that conversation later. For now, I wanted to simply exist in this moment of accomplishment, of new beginnings, of life reclaimed from the shadow of illness and the constraints of others' expectations. As I turned out the lights and locked the door behind me, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from a small-town librarian to cancer patient to bookstore owner, from a mother desperate to provide security for her son to a woman standing firmly in her own power. Gregory would have questions. He would want explanations, justifications for why I had lived modestly while helping him financially, why I hadn't disclosed my resources earlier, what my revised estate plan meant for him. Vanessa would be calculating angles, looking for advantages, wondering how to position herself and the children to benefit maximum from my unexpected prosperity. Let them wonder. Let them question. I had spent a lifetime considering their needs, their futures, their comfort. Now, in the wake of confronting my mortality, I had discovered the liberation of living for myself, not selfishly, but authentically. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, with the quiet strength I had always possessed but only recently learned to claim. 3 days after the bookstore opening, I received an email from Gregory's assistant requesting a lunch meeting at an upscale restaurant near his office. The formality of the approach, scheduling through his assistant rather than calling me directly, spoke volumes about his state of mind. My son was shifting into business mode, treating this conversation as a negotiation rather than a family matter. I accepted the invitation with equal formality, suggesting an alternate venue, a small French bistro near my new condominium that had become my favorite lunch spot. The morning of our meeting, I found myself unusually anxious, taking extra care with my appearance and rehearsing potential responses to questions I anticipated. This wasn't like me. I had never been one to fret over confrontations. But something about facing my only child across a table, knowing he now viewed me primarily as a potential asset rather than a mother, filled me with a peculiar sadness. I arrived at Petit Fleur 15 minutes early, securing a quiet corner table that offered both privacy and a pleasant view of the small garden patio. The restaurant was busy enough to create ambient conversation, but not so crowded that we would be overheard. Perfect for what promised to be a delicate discussion. Gregory arrived precisely on time, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe before my recent shopping excursion. He spotted me immediately, his expression carefully neutral as he navigated between tables. "Mom," he said, leaning down to brush his lips against my cheek in a gesture more perfunctory than affectionate. "You're looking well." "Cancer-free agrees with me," I replied with deliberate lightness, gesturing to the chair across from mine. "Please sit, they have an excellent prix-fixe lunch here." He settled into the chair, placing his phone face down on the table, a courtesy I noticed he extended only after checking it one last time. "I've never heard of this place," he said, glancing around with the assessing eye of someone accustomed to dining in establishments where being seen was as important as the food. "It's a neighborhood gem," I said. "Family-owned for 3 generations. The chef trained in Lyon." Gregory picked up the menu, studying it briefly before setting it aside. "You've become quite the cosmopolitan lately." I smiled. "I've always appreciated quality, Gregory. I simply express it differently now." The waiter appeared, and we ordered a niçoise salad for me, steak frites for Gregory, sparkling water for us both. When the waiter had departed, Gregory folded his hands on the table, assuming what I recognized as his negotiation posture. "I've been thinking about our conversation at the bookstore," he began, "and I have to admit I'm confused." "About what, specifically?" I asked, though I knew perfectly well. "About this sudden transformation," he said, gesturing vaguely to encompass me, the restaurant, everything. "For as long as I can remember, you were frugal to the point of self-denial. You drove that old car into the ground. You refused to replace appliances until they completely failed. You shopped sales and used coupons and wore clothes until they were threadbare." "All true," I acknowledged. "And yet now," he shook his head, "a luxury apartment, a new Audi, designer clothes, a bookstore that must have cost hundreds of thousands to launch. It doesn't make sense, Mom." I took a sip of water, considering my response. "Have you ever heard the phrase stealth wealth, Gregory?" He frowned. "Of course, people who have money but don't display it." "That's been my approach for many years," I said, "long before it became a trendy term." "But why?" he pressed. "Why live like you were one paycheck away from disaster when you weren't?" Our food arrived, providing a brief respite from the intensity of the conversation. I waited until the waiter had departed before responding. "There are many reasons," I said, carefully arranging my napkin in my lap. "After your father died, financial security became tremendously important to me. I never wanted to be in a position where I couldn't provide for you or myself. As my investments grew, that sense of security came from knowing I had resources, not from displaying them." Gregory cut into his steak with precise movements. "That explains saving. It doesn't explain living as if you were on a tight budget." "Doesn't it?" I countered gently. "The habits that help build wealth often become ingrained, distinguishing between needs and wants, considering the long-term value of purchases, finding satisfaction in simplicity. Those are philosophical justifications," he said, waving his fork dismissively. What's the real reason? I set down my utensils, meeting his gaze directly. The real reason, Gregory, is that I wanted you to develop character, not expectation. I wanted you to value work and achievement, not wait for inheritance or handouts. His expression hardened. That's quite an accusation. It's not an accusation at all, I replied evenly. It's an explanation of my parenting philosophy. I helped you when it mattered. College tuition, graduate school, your house down payment. But I never wanted you to see me as a bottomless resource. Never wanted you to plan your life around what you might eventually inherit. And yet you clearly had more than enough to live more comfortably yourself, he said, an edge creeping into his voice. You chose deprivation for what? Some kind of moral high ground. I never felt deprived, I said, surprised by his characterization. I had everything I needed and much of what I wanted. I simply had different priorities than conspicuous consumption. Gregory took a bite of his steak, chewing thoughtfully. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from confrontational to calculating. How much are we talking about, Mom? Ballpark figure. The directness of the question, despite my previous refusal to answer it, confirmed my suspicions about his motives for this meeting. I sighed inwardly, but kept my expression neutral. My finances are private, Gregory. What matters is that I'm secure. I'm pursuing dreams I deferred while raising you, and I've made provisions for Zoe and Caleb's futures. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. So you are changing your will. I've updated my estate plan to reflect my current priorities, I confirmed, using the same phrasing I had at the bookstore. And those priorities no longer include me? There was a hint of vulnerability beneath the challenge in his voice, a glimpse of the child who had once looked to me for everything. You're a successful professional in your 40s, I pointed out gently. You don't need the kind of boost that Zoe and Caleb will when they're starting out. But of course you're included, Gregory. You're my son. He seemed momentarily mollified, though I had been deliberately vague about the extent of his inclusion. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the quiet between us filled with unspoken calculations and considerations. The bookstore, he said finally. That's a significant investment in a struggling industry. Was that wise? I couldn't help but smile at his attempt to position himself as the financially prudent one in our relationship. The store is structured as a benefit corporation with strong community engagement elements. It's designed to be profitable, but also to qualify for certain tax advantages and grant opportunities. Helen, my financial advisor, and I created a business plan that allows for 3 years of operational subsidy while building toward sustainability. Gregory blinked, clearly not expecting such a thoroughly considered response. I didn't realize you had that kind of business acumen. I managed my investments for years before engaging professional advisors, I reminded him. And I may have been a librarian, but I understand how businesses operate, especially in the book industry. Still, he persisted, it's a significant risk at your age. What if you have a cancer recurrence, health complications? Have you considered the succession planning? Ah, there it was. The subtle reminder of my mortality. The positioning of himself as the concerned, practical son worried about my welfare rather than his inheritance. The business entity is structured with clear contingency plans, I assured him, including management succession and eventual transfer to a trust benefiting literary programs for underserved communities if I'm no longer able to oversee it. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. A trust for literary programs, not family? I met his gaze steadily. The bookstore is my passion project, Gregory, not a family asset. Your children will be well provided for in other ways. The waiter approached to clear our plates and offer dessert menus. I accepted. Gregory declined, checking his watch with a show of remembering his busy schedule. I should probably get back to the office soon, he said. But there's one more thing I wanted to discuss. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. Vanessa and I have been looking at private schools for Zoe, he said, his tone deliberately casual. The Whitfield Academy has an excellent program for gifted children, which would be perfect for her artistic talents. The only issue is... He hesitated, as if reluctant to continue. The tuition? I supplied. He nodded, affecting embarrassment. It's considerable. Between that and Caleb starting at Riverview Prep next year, plus the mortgage refinancing we're considering for some necessary home improvements. He spread his hands in a gesture meant to convey regretful responsibility. And you're wondering if I might help, I concluded for him. Only if it's not a strain, he added quickly. Given your new ventures and lifestyle changes, I wouldn't want to impose if your finances are already committed elsewhere. I almost laughed at the transparency of his approach, the implication that I might have overextended myself with my lifestyle changes, the suggestion that helping with his children's education would be a burden rather than a joy, all designed to gauge exactly how much disposable income I had available. The children's education is important, I said carefully. I'd be happy to look at the information about these schools and consider how I might contribute to their tuition. His expression brightened. That would be tremendously helpful, Mom. Truly. I'll have Vanessa send you the brochures and cost breakdowns. Please do, I said, then added with deliberate casualness. Though I'm a bit surprised you're considering private education now. I recall Vanessa was quite passionate about the public school system when Zoe started kindergarten. Something about socioeconomic diversity being important for developing empathy. Gregory had the grace to look slightly abashed. Priorities evolve, he said. The public schools are fine, but they can't offer the specialized attention and advanced curriculum these private institutions provide. I nodded, not mentioning that this evolution in priorities had coincided precisely with the revelation of my financial status. I'll review the materials when Vanessa sends them, I promised. When the check arrived, I reached for it immediately. Gregory made a perfunctory attempt to object, which I waved off. I invited you to my favorite restaurant, I reminded him. It's my pleasure to treat you. As we walked out of the restaurant, Gregory checked his phone again, frowning at whatever he saw there. I've got to run, he said. Conference call in 20 minutes. But this was enlightening. It was good to talk, I agreed. Give my love to Vanessa and the children. He hesitated, then asked, When are you moving into your new place, the condo you mentioned? Next week, I told him. It's just a few blocks from here, actually. Perhaps we could see it sometime? The request was awkward, a transparent attempt to assess the value of my latest investment. Of course, I said. Once I'm settled, I'll have you all over for dinner. We parted with another perfunctory cheek kiss, and I watched as he strode toward the parking garage, already typing something on his phone. My son, the financial manager, recalculating his approach now that he understood his mother was not the simple retiree he had always assumed. I walked slowly back to my temporary apartment, mulling over our conversation. It had gone largely as expected. Gregory's shock giving way to calculation, his attempt to position himself as the concerned son while probing for specifics about my resources. What had surprised me was my own emotional response, not anger at his transparent maneuvering, but a deep sadness at the realization that our relationship had been irreversibly altered. He would never again see me simply as his mother. I would always be, at least in part, a potential asset to be managed. Back in my apartment, I found an email from Helen with the final paperwork for my condo closing and a reminder about our meeting with the estate attorney the following day. I responded with a brief confirmation, then turned to a more pleasant task, reviewing the first week's sales reports from fabled pages, which Miranda had sent over that morning. The figures were encouraging, with strong performance across all departments and especially robust results in the rare books section, where several significant sales had been made to serious collectors. The cafe had quickly developed a loyal following, with many customers lingering longer than expected, often adding book purchases to their orders. The children's section had been consistently busy, with the first official storytime session already fully booked. I was immersed in these details when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Expecting it might be related to the bookstore, I answered promptly. "Mrs. Anderson, this is Elaine Cooper from the Whitfield Academy." I blinked in surprise. Gregory had wasted no time. "Yes?" I responded cautiously. "I'm calling about your granddaughter, Zoe Anderson. Your son indicated that you would be handling the financial arrangements for her application and wanted us to contact you directly." The presumption was breathtaking. Less than 2 hours after our lunch, Gregory had not only contacted the school, but had given them my name as the financial responsible party, without consulting me or even waiting for the promised brochures to be sent for my consideration. "I see," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "That's rather premature, Ms. Cooper. While I'm certainly interested in learning more about your institution, no decisions have been made regarding Zoe's education or my potential involvement in financing." There was an awkward pause. "Oh, I was given to understand that the arrangement was settled." Mr. Anderson was quite definitive. "Was he indeed?" I said, a chill entering my tone. Then Mr. Anderson was overconfident. "Before any financial commitments are made, I would need to thoroughly review your program, understand your educational philosophy, and discuss the matter directly with Zoe, who may have her own preferences about schooling." "Of course," Ms. Cooper backpedaled smoothly. "We would be delighted to arrange a tour and information session for you and Zoe at your convenience." "Thank you. Please email me the available dates," I said. "I'll coordinate with my son and granddaughter." After ending the call, I sat for a long moment, considering this development. Gregory's presumption was galling but not entirely surprising. Throughout his adult life, he had grown accustomed to my financial support being available whenever he deemed it necessary, always assuming my answer would be yes. The only difference now was the scale of what he believed he could request. My phone chimed with a text message from Vanessa. "Gregory mentioned you're interested in helping with the children's education. So thoughtful. I've attached the brochures for both schools and tuition information. The deposit for Whitfield is due by the 15th to secure Zoe's spot. They're very competitive." I set the phone aside without responding. The deposit deadline was clearly meant to create a sense of urgency, to pressure me into committing quickly before I could consider too carefully. It was a sales tactic I recognized from my years of careful consumption. Create scarcity. Imply, that delay means loss. Rush the mark to decision. Instead of replying immediately, I opened my laptop and began researching Whitfield Academy, going beyond the glossy brochure claims to examine parent reviews, educational outcomes, and news mentions. What emerged was a picture of an undeniably excellent academic institution that also served as a networking hub for Boston's wealthiest families. The tuition was indeed eye-watering, nearly $50,000 per year for elementary students, with additional required contributions to building funds and special programs. Riverview Prep, where they apparently planned to send Caleb, was similarly prestigious and expensive. Combined, the educational costs for both children would exceed $100,000 annually, a figure that even Gregory's substantial income would strain to cover without significant support. I closed my laptop, a plan forming in my mind. Rising, I moved to the large windows of my apartment, watching the late afternoon light play across the river. The anger I had initially felt at Gregory's presumption was fading, replaced by a clear-eyed determination. This was an opportunity, not just to establish boundaries with my son, but to create something meaningful for my grandchildren that aligned with my own values, rather than Gregory and Vanessa's social climbing aspirations. The next morning, I met with Helen and Walter Simmons, the estate attorney who had helped me restructure my will and establish the trusts for Zoe and Caleb. Walter was a thoughtful man in his 60s with a reputation for creative solutions to complex family dynamics. "I want to establish educational trusts for my grandchildren," I explained after we had exchanged pleasantries. "Separate from the existing trusts, specifically dedicated to their schooling from elementary through college." Walter nodded, making notes. "Do you have particular parameters in mind?" "Yes," I said firmly. "The trusts should cover full tuition at any accredited institution, public or private, but disbursements go directly to the schools, not to my son or daughter-in-law. And I want the children to have agency in the decision-making process. As they get older, they should be consulted about their educational preferences, not simply placed wherever their parents deem socially advantageous." Helen raised an eyebrow but nodded approvingly. "That's doable. We can structure it with age-appropriate consultation requirements. For elementary school, you as trustee would have approval rights along with their parents. For middle school and beyond, the children's preferences would carry increasing weight." Walter looked up from his notes. "And if there's disagreement between the parents' choice and your assessment of what's best for the children?" "Then an independent educational consultant would be engaged to evaluate the options and make a recommendation," I said, having thought this through carefully. "I don't want to override Gregory and Vanessa entirely, but I also don't want my grandchildren's education to be determined solely by social considerations or prestige factors." "That's a thoughtful approach," Walter said. "It balances parental authority with your role as the financial provider, while ultimately centering the children's actual educational needs." We spent the next hour refining the details of the educational trusts, funding amounts, disbursement mechanisms, consultation processes. When we finished, I felt satisfied that I had created a structure that would benefit Zoe and Caleb while preventing Gregory and Vanessa from simply using my money to advance their social aspirations. "There's one more thing," I said as we were concluding. "Gregory is pressing for immediate enrollment in a particular private school. I'd like to have a preliminary version of this trust established quickly, so I can present it as the mechanism through which I'll support their education, rather than simply writing checks as requested." Walter consulted his calendar. "I can have the draft documents to you by early next week. We can execute them shortly thereafter." "Perfect," I said. "And Helen, could you prepare an analysis of Whitfield Academy and Riverview Prep? Educational outcomes, teaching philosophy, student-teacher ratios, objective measures beyond the prestige factor." Helen nodded. "I'll have my team pull together a comprehensive evaluation of both schools alongside comparable alternatives." Armed with this plan, I felt ready to respond to Vanessa's message. Rather than texting back, I called Gregory's cell phone that evening. "Mom," he answered, sounding cautiously pleased. "Did you get the information Vanessa sent about the schools?" "I did," I confirmed. "And I also received a call from Whitfield Academy's finance office, which was rather premature." There was a brief pause. "I just wanted to get the ball rolling," he said defensively. "These spots fill quickly and Zoe would be starting mid-year." "I understand the time pressure," I said evenly, "but I've been giving this careful thought, and I have a different approach to propose. Rather than making ad hoc tuition payments, I'm establishing educational trusts for both children that will cover their schooling through college." "Trusts?" He sounded wary. "That seems unnecessarily complicated for simple tuition payments." "It's actually the most efficient approach. From a tax perspective," I explained, "and it ensures both children will have their educational needs fully funded, regardless of any future circumstances." "Future circumstances," he echoed. "What does that mean?" "Life is unpredictable, Gregory," I said gently. "These trusts ensure that even if something happens to me, or if your financial situation changes, the children's education will never be compromised." He was silent for a moment, likely calculating whether this arrangement would give him less or more access to my resources than direct payments would. How would it work exactly? He finally asked. The trusts will pay tuition directly to any accredited educational institution you and the children select, I explained, deliberately emphasizing the children's involvement. For their elementary years, you, Vanessa, and I would agree on appropriate schools. As they get older, Zoe and Caleb would have increasing input into those decisions. I see. His tone had cooled slightly. And the funding amount? Sufficient to cover any reasonable educational choice from elementary through graduate school. If they choose to pursue advanced degrees, I said. Walter Simmons is preparing the documentation now. We should be able to finalize everything well before your deposit deadline for Whitfield. That's generous, he acknowledged, though I could hear the calculations continuing behind his careful response. Though I'm not sure I understand why Zoe and Caleb need to be involved in school selection. They're children. They're people, I corrected, gently. Young people with their own talents, interests, and learning styles. The best education is one that aligns with who they are, not just one that carries a prestigious name. Mom, we know what's best for our children, he said, an edge entering his voice. Vanessa has researched these schools extensively. I'm sure she has, I agreed, and her input is valuable. But so is Zoe's happiness and engagement with her education. Has anyone asked her what kind of school environment she might prefer? The silence on the other end of the line told me they hadn't. I'm having Helen's team prepare an objective analysis of both Whitfield and Riverview, I continued, along with several comparable alternatives. Why don't we review that information together, and then perhaps take Zoe to visit the top contenders? She's old enough to form impressions about where she might thrive. This feels like you're trying to control the situation, Gregory said stiffly. Not control, I corrected. Participate. These are my grandchildren, and this is a significant investment in their futures. I want it to be the right investment for them as individuals, not just a ticket to social connections or alumni networks. We went back and forth for several more minutes, with Gregory attempting to regain the upper hand and me holding firm to my position. Finally, he conceded with poor grace, agreeing to wait for the trust documentation and school evaluations before making any commitments. Fine, he said. But if this delays things and Zoe loses her spot at Whitfield, then she'll attend another excellent school better suited to her specific needs, I finished smoothly. Education isn't about exclusivity, Gregory. It's about growth and discovery. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my darkening apartment, watching the city lights come alive across the river. I had won this round, establishing that my financial support would come with conditions, thoughtful ones focused on my grandchildren's well-being, but conditions nonetheless. Gregory wouldn't like it, but he would accept it because the alternative was paying those massive tuition bills himself. Yet I took no pleasure in the victory. What I wanted wasn't control or even influence. What I wanted was for my son to see his children as individual human beings with their own needs and voices, not as accessories to his and Vanessa's social aspirations. What I wanted was for him to remember the values I had tried to instill. That money was a tool for security and opportunity, not a pathway to status or exclusivity. But perhaps those were lessons he would never learn. Perhaps the best I could do now was to ensure that Zoe and Caleb had the chance to develop their own relationship with privilege and responsibility, separate from their parents' values. The educational trusts were a start, a structure that would expose them to the idea that great resources came with the obligation to use them thoughtfully, not merely consume them conspicuously. Tomorrow, I would begin moving into my permanent home, the spacious condominium that represented my new beginning. The following week, we would finalize the educational trusts and present the framework to Gregory and Vanessa. And somewhere in That busy schedule, I would make time to take Zoe and Caleb for ice cream and really ask them, what kind of schools they might enjoy attending. Not because I wanted to undermine their parents' authority, but because someone needed to show these children that their voices mattered, that their authentic selves were more important than any social facade, and that their grandmother saw them, truly, saw them, for exactly who they were. Moving day dawned with a perfect blue sky, the kind of early summer morning that promises possibility. I'd hired professional movers, of course. At 62 and still rebuilding my strength after cancer treatment, I had no business lifting boxes. But I was determined to oversee the process personally. This condominium represented more than just a new home. It was the physical manifestation of my transformation, my declaration of independence. I arrived at the building by 8, greeting the doorman by name and taking the elevator to the 8th floor. The previous owner had already vacated, leaving behind the agreed-upon furniture and fixtures gleaming in the morning sunlight. I walked through the empty rooms, running my hand along marble countertops and solid wood banisters, imagining the life I would build here. Not a retirement in the traditional sense, a fading away, a diminishment, but a flourishing, a second act richer than the first. The movers arrived precisely on schedule, efficient men in matching uniforms who treated my belongings with respect. I directed the placement of the few pieces I'd brought from storage: my grandmother's writing desk, my favorite reading chair, the handmade quilt that had adorned every bed I'd slept in since college. Everything else was new or belonged to the previous owner, selected to create an environment that honored both my past and my future. By mid-afternoon, the major work was done. I tipped the movers generously, then stood in the center of my new living room, savoring the quiet and the quality of light filtering through the sheer curtains. A soft chime from my phone interrupted my reverie. A text from Zoe. "Did you move? To your new house today? Can we come see it?" I smiled at her eagerness, then noticed it had been sent from Vanessa's phone rather than Zoe's tablet. An unexpected overture, perhaps prompted by Gregory's report of our conversation about the educational trusts. "Yes to both questions," I typed back. "Would tomorrow afternoon work? I could pick the children up after school." The response came quickly. "That would be fine. Gregory mentioned you're creating trusts for the children's education. Perhaps we could discuss while they explore." Ah, there it was, the real motivation. Not Zoe's curiosity about my new home, but Vanessa's interest in the financial arrangements I was making for her children. "Of course," I replied. "I'll have copies of the preliminary documents ready for review." I spent the rest of the day arranging my personal items, organizing the kitchen to my liking, and placing books on shelves, some from my old collection, others new acquisitions that reflected my current interests rather than the practical needs of a school librarian. By evening, the space had transformed from a perfectly staged real estate offering to a home that felt uniquely mine. After a simple dinner eaten at my new kitchen island, I settled in the study with my laptop to review the draft trust documents Walter had sent over. They were exactly as we had discussed: comprehensive, thoughtful provisions that would ensure Zoe and Caleb's educational needs would be met while establishing a framework that emphasized their agency and genuine educational fit over prestige or social advantages. I made a few small notations, mostly clarifying language rather than substantive changes, then prepared a simplified summary for Gregory and Vanessa that highlighted the benefits to the children while diplomatically outlining the decision-making process. The trusts would be funded with $2 million each, more than enough to cover even the most expensive educational paths from elementary school through graduate studies, with any remainder becoming available to the children at 35 for ongoing educational pursuits or to fund education for their own children. The next day, I arrived at Zoe and Caleb's school at 3 o'clock sharp, pulling my Audi into the visitors' parking area. The children rushed toward me when they spotted me. Caleb launching himself at my legs while Zoe approached with the measured dignity of a 9-year-old determined to appear mature in front of her classmates. "Grandma, you came in your new car," Caleb exclaimed, peering around me to admire the vehicle. "I did," I confirmed, ruffling his hair affectionately. "And we're going to my new home now. Are you ready for an adventure?" "Is it really big?" Zoe asked, sliding into the back seat. With practiced ease. "Dad said it cost a fortune." I raised an eyebrow at this characterization, but kept my tone light. "It's just the right size for me, with room for visitors like you two. And everything has a cost, Zoe. The question is whether it brings value." She considered this seriously, as I navigated through afternoon traffic. "Dad says value means something is worth more than you pay for it. Like when stocks go up." "That's one kind of value," I agreed. "But there are others, like the value of beauty or comfort, or making memories with people you love." Caleb, less interested in economics, was bouncing in his seat pointing out interesting sights as we drove. When we pulled into the garage beneath my building, both children were suitably impressed by the sleek modern space with its designated parking spots and security features. "Is this whole building yours?" Caleb asked with a child's natural assumption that grandmothers must be either poor or ridiculously wealthy, with no middle ground. I laughed. "No, sweetheart. Just one condominium inside it. But I do have access to all the common areas, like the rooftop garden and the fitness center." The doorman greeted us warmly as we entered the lobby, addressing the children by name after I introduced them. This small courtesy clearly delighted them, Zoe straightening to her full height and Caleb attempting a formal handshake in return. "Your grandmother is a wonderful addition to our community," the doorman told them gravely. "We're very pleased she's chosen to make her home with us." In the elevator, Zoe turned to me with wide eyes. "He knows you already? You must be important." "Not important," I corrected gently. "Just friendly. I make a point of learning people's names and asking about their lives. It's how we build community." The elevator doors opened directly into my foyer, an elegant space with marble floors and a crystal chandelier that had been a key selling point for me. Not for its luxury, but for the way it scattered rainbows across the walls when the afternoon sun struck it just right. "Whoa," Caleb breathed, tilting his head back to stare up at the fixture. "It's like magic." "Exactly what I thought," I told him, pleased by his reaction. "Wait until you see what it does around 4 o'clock when the sun hits it just right." I led them through the condominium, showing them the spacious kitchen with its professional-grade appliances, the formal dining room where I imagined hosting family holidays, the comfortable living room with views of the river, and finally, the 3 bedrooms, my master suite and 2 guest rooms, one of which I had specifically designed with them in mind. "This is your room when you visit," I explained, opening the door to reveal a space decorated in cheerful colors with twin beds, a reading nook stocked with age-appropriate books, and a small desk where they could draw or play games. "You can change anything you don't like." Zoe walked slowly around the perimeter, trailing her fingers over the spines of books and examining the art I'd selected. Whimsical pieces that evoked childhood without being childish. "It's perfect," she declared finally. "Way better than the playroom at our house." Caleb had already claimed one of the beds, bouncing experimentally on the mattress. "Can we sleep over? Please?" "That's up to your parents," I said, "but the room will be here whenever they say yes." We were still exploring when the doorman called up to announce that Vanessa had arrived. I instructed him to send her up, then turned to the children. "Why don't you continue looking around while I talk with your mother? The roof garden is especially nice. We can go up there in a little while." Vanessa stepped off the elevator moments later, her expression carefully composed but her eyes darting around the foyer, taking in every detail. She was dressed with her usual calculated casualness, designer jeans, a silk blouse, and ballet flats that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe during my librarian days. "Florence," she greeted me, leaning in for an air kiss near my cheek. What a lovely building. So established. It's nearly 100 years old, I confirmed, gesturing for her to follow me to the living room. The architecture has such character, don't you think? Absolutely. Her gaze swept across the space, lingering on the original crown moldings, the herringbone hardwood floors, the tasteful furnishings that struck a perfect balance between traditional and contemporary. Did you work with a decorator? No, most of the furniture came with the place. The previous owner had excellent taste that happened to align with mine, I explained, watching as she recalculated whatever assumptions she'd been making. Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Wine? Water? Just water, thank you. She settled onto the sofa, perching on its edge rather than allowing herself to relax. The children seemed thrilled with the place. I smiled, returning from the kitchen, with 2 glasses of sparkling water. They're exploring. I made up a room especially for them, for visits. How thoughtful, she murmured, though I detected a flicker of unease at the implication that the children might spend significant time here without her supervision. Gregory mentioned you wanted to discuss the educational trusts? Yes, I said, reaching for the folder I'd placed on the coffee table earlier. Walter, my attorney, has prepared preliminary documents. These are just summaries for your review. Vanessa accepted the folder, opening it immediately and scanning the first page with the intensity of someone searching for hidden traps. 2 million each, she read aloud, her eyebrows lifting. That's very generous. Education has always been my priority, I said simply. I want Zoe and Caleb to have every opportunity, just as I provided for Gregory. She continued reading, her expression growing more guarded with each paragraph. This seems unnecessarily complicated, she said finally, echoing Gregory's initial reaction. The consultation requirements, the independent evaluator provision, why not simply fund the schools we've selected? Because education isn't just about credentials, I explained patiently. It's about finding the right environment where each child can thrive. That requires ongoing assessment and adjustment, especially as they develop and their needs change. We are perfectly capable of assessing our children's educational needs, Vanessa said, a defensive edge entering her voice. Of course you are, I agreed. And your input is central to the process. But so is mine, as the person funding their education, and increasingly, so are Zoe and Caleb's own perspectives. The trusts simply create a framework for collaborative decision-making. She closed the folder with a snap. Gregory won't like this. Gregory helped shape these provisions. I lied smoothly. We discussed the general approach yesterday. This wasn't strictly true. I had informed Gregory of my decision rather than collaborating with him. But I knew Vanessa would be more likely to accept the arrangement if she believed her husband had already signed off on it. He didn't mention that, she said, doubt evident in her tone. We had quite a lengthy conversation, I continued. I believe he understands my perspective, even if it wasn't his initial preference. Vanessa pursed her lips, clearly recalculating her approach. Well, obviously we appreciate your generosity. The private school tuitions are substantial. It's just the process that seems unusual. Think of it as an insurance policy, I suggested. A guarantee that educational decisions will always be made thoughtfully, with the children's best interests at heart, no matter what circumstances might arise in the future. Before she could respond, Zoe and Caleb burst into the living room, full of excitement about their explorations. Mom, there's a movie room with the biggest TV ever, Caleb announced. And a garden on the roof with real trees and a fountain. And our bedroom has the coolest books, Zoe added. Special editions with illustrations and everything. Can we stay overnight sometime? Please? Vanessa's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. We'll see, she said, her standard response when the answer was likely to be no. Did you thank your grandmother for thinking of you? The children dutifully thanked me, though I could see the disappointment in their eyes at their mother's non-committal response. I squeezed Zoe's hand reassuringly. The room will be waiting whenever the time is right, I told her. Now, how about we all go up to that roof garden you mentioned? The view of the sunset is spectacular. The remainder of the visit passed pleasantly enough on the surface, with the children exploring the rooftop amenities while Vanessa and I maintained a polite facade. When it was time for them to leave, I walked them to the elevator, promising Zoe and Caleb that we would visit the bookstore again soon. I'll have Gregory call you about these, Vanessa said, tapping the folder containing the trust summaries, after he's had a chance to review them thoroughly. Of course, I replied serenely. I'm always happy to discuss any questions or concerns. After they left, I returned to my living room, pouring myself a glass of wine and settling into my favorite chair by the window. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the Charles River reflecting its glory in rippling patches of color. It was a view I would never tire of, a daily reminder of beauty and possibility. My phone chimed with a text from Gregory. Just spoke with Vanessa. We need to discuss these trust provisions further. Dinner tomorrow? My treat. I smiled at the screen. Your treat was a small yet telling concession, an acknowledgement that our dynamic had shifted, that he now felt the need to reciprocate rather than simply accept my generosity. Sounds lovely, I replied. You choose the place. The restaurant Gregory selected was an upscale steakhouse in Back Bay, the kind of establishment where dark wood paneling and subdued lighting created an atmosphere of masculine prosperity. It was clearly intended to impress me, to demonstrate that he too moved in circles of wealth and influence. I arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple but elegant dress in deep teal that brought out the color of my eyes, accessorized with my mother's pearl earrings and a matching necklace. Gregory was already seated, rising as I approached the table. Mom, he greeted me, brushing my cheek with a kiss that felt more genuine than his recent perfunctory gestures. You look fantastic. Thank you, I said, allowing the maitre d' to help me into my chair. This is a lovely choice. I've heard excellent things about their dry-aged steaks. The porterhouse is incredible, Gregory confirmed. I come here fairly often for client dinners. We exchanged pleasantries while perusing the menu, both of us aware that the real conversation would wait until after we'd ordered. When the waiter had taken our selections, filet mignon for me, the porterhouse for Gregory, with shared sides of roasted mushrooms and truffle mashed potatoes, my son finally broached the subject that had prompted this dinner. I've reviewed the trust documents, he began, his tone carefully neutral. The funding is exceptionally generous, more than enough for any educational path Zoe and Caleb might choose. I'm glad you think so, I replied, unfolding my napkin and placing it in my lap. It was important to me to ensure they'd have every opportunity. The decision-making process, though, he continued, leaning forward slightly. It's unnecessarily complex, Mom. Vanessa and I are their parents. We should have final authority over their education. I took a sip of the excellent Cabernet the sommelier had recommended. Consider it from my perspective, Gregory. I'm committing substantial resources to my grandchildren's education. It's reasonable for me to have some input into how those resources are deployed. Some input, yes, he acknowledged. But an equal vote? And this business about bringing in an outside consultant if we disagree? Think of it as a fail-safe, I suggested. In the unlikely event that we fundamentally disagree about what's best for Zoe or Caleb, wouldn't it be helpful to have an objective perspective from someone whose expertise is education, not family dynamics? He frowned slightly. It implies a lack of trust in our judgment as parents. Not at all, I countered. It acknowledges that all of us, you, Vanessa, me, have our own biases and blind spots. My concern is solely that decisions be made based on what will best serve each child's individual needs and talents, not on. Other considerations. Other considerations, he repeated, his expression hardening. Such as? I met his gaze. Steadily. Social connections, prestige, the right people. These shouldn't be the primary factors in choosing a 7-year-old's school, Gregory. Our appetizers arrived. A classic shrimp cocktail for Gregory, a roasted beet salad for me, creating a brief respite in the increasingly tense conversation. When the server had departed, Gregory speared a shrimp with unnecessary force. You think we're shallow, he said flatly, that we only care about appearances and networking. I think you value certain things that may sometimes overshadow more important considerations, I corrected gently. Vanessa in particular seems very concerned with social position. That's not fair, he protested, though without much conviction. She wants the best for our children. As do I assured him. We simply might define best differently. These trust provisions ensure that multiple perspectives are considered, including, most importantly, the children's own. He shook his head. They're too young to make educational decisions. Not to make the decisions, I clarified, but certainly old enough to express preferences and describe their experiences. Zoe is 9, Gregory. She knows whether she feels engaged or bored in a classroom, whether she connects with teaching styles, whether a particular environment makes her anxious or confident. And you think Whitfield would make her anxious? He challenged. I don't know, I said truthfully. I haven't visited Whitfield, and neither has Zoe. That's precisely my point. Before committing to an expensive private school that will shape her formative years, shouldn't we at least ensure it's the right fit for her specific personality and learning style? Gregory seemed about to argue further, then appeared to reconsider his approach. Setting down his fork, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What changed, Mom? He asked finally. You were never this assertive about my education. You let Dad and me make all the decisions. I smiled, recognizing the attempt to shift the conversation away from the trusts and toward my personal transformation. Many things changed, I replied. I faced my mortality with cancer. I recognized patterns I'd been blind to. I decided to live more authentically, which includes expressing my values more directly. And your values don't align with private education? He pressed. My values align with education that serves the individual child, whether public or private, I corrected. What they don't align with is using children's education primarily as a tool for social advancement or network building. Our entrees arrived before Gregory could respond, the conversation pausing as the server presented our steaks with a flourish and arranged the side dishes between us. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the quality of the food providing a welcome distraction from the tension. These trusts represent a significant gift, I said finally, setting down my knife and fork. One that will relieve you and Vanessa of a tremendous financial burden while ensuring Zoe and Caleb can attend any educational institution that's right for them. All I'm asking in return is that those institutions be selected thoughtfully, with genuine consideration for each child's individual needs and with their input as they mature. Gregory chewed slowly, his expression thoughtful. And if we refuse these terms, if we insist on simpler arrangements, then you're free to make whatever educational choices you deem appropriate for your children, funded through your own resources, I said calmly. The trusts are my offer, not an obligation. He set down his fork with a faint sigh. You know we can't afford Whitfield and Riverview on our own. I know you might need to prioritize differently, I acknowledged. Perhaps choose schools with more moderate tuitions, or consider the excellent public options in your district. There are always alternatives, Gregory. This feels like manipulation, he said, though without real heat. using your financial leverage to impose your educational philosophy. I prefer to think of it as alignment, I countered, ensuring that my financial support advances values I believe in, rather than undermining them. We finished our meal, with sporadic conversation about safer topics, the bookstore's promising first weeks, Zoe's recent interest in painting, Caleb's Little League team. As we waited for dessert, Gregory seemed to reach some internal resolution. "All right," he said abruptly. "We'll accept the trust provisions as written. But I want one amendment. If Vanessa and I are in agreement about a school choice, your objection alone shouldn't trigger the outside consultant provision. It should require at least one of us to share your concerns." I considered this carefully. It was a reasonable compromise that still protected the children from their parents' united social climbing instincts. "Fair enough," I agreed. "I'll have Walter modify the language accordingly." Relief flashed across Gregory's face, followed quickly by a more calculated expression. "And while we're discussing financial matters," he began with affected casualness, "Vanessa and I have been talking about our home. With the children growing, we could really use more space. Perhaps a property with a pool for summer, maybe a dedicated playroom so the living areas can be more adult." I sipped my water, unsurprised by this transparent pivot. Having secured the educational funding, he was already angling for the next infusion of support. "How interesting," I murmured. "What neighborhoods are you considering?" He named an even more exclusive suburb, detailing properties they'd viewed and the amenities they offered. I listened attentively, nodding at appropriate intervals while inwardly marveling at how quickly he had shifted from reluctant acceptance of the educational trust to planning his next request. "It sounds lovely," I said when he finally paused for breath. "Though, of course, a larger home means higher property taxes, increased maintenance costs, potentially longer commutes." "We've factored all that in," he assured me quickly. "The only hurdle is the down payment. Boston real estate values have increased so dramatically since we bought our current home." I nodded sympathetically. "Real estate can indeed be challenging. Have you considered what your current home might sell for in this market? You've made some lovely improvements." His expression faltered slightly. "We've looked into it. After paying off our existing mortgage and the home equity line we took for the renovations last year, there wouldn't be much equity to roll into a new property." "I see," I said, allowing a thoughtful pause before continuing. "You know, Gregory, one of the most valuable lessons I've learned is the importance of living within our means, whatever those means might be. There's a freedom in it, knowing that what you have is truly yours, not dependent on others or leveraged beyond your capacity." His face tightened. "Is that a no?" "It's not a request I'm prepared to consider right now," I said gently. "The educational trusts represent a significant commitment. Let's focus on implementing those successfully before discussing other financial matters." Dessert arrived, a chocolate soufflé for Gregory, fresh berries with crème fraîche for me, providing a timely interruption to what was becoming an increasingly strained exchange. We ate in silence, the sophisticated ambiance of the restaurant at odds with the tension between us. "I didn't mean to upset you," I said finally, setting down my spoon. "I simply believe there's value in taking things one step at a time." Gregory nodded stiffly, pride warring with disappointment on his face. "Of course, the trusts are extremely generous. I shouldn't have—" He broke off, recalibrating. "We're grateful for your support with the children's education. Truly." I reached across the table to briefly touch his hand. "I know you want the best for them, Gregory. We share that goal, even if we sometimes differ on the approach." The remainder of the evening passed without further reference to financial matters, though a certain coolness had settled between us. When the check arrived, Gregory insisted on paying, a gesture I accepted graciously despite noting the flash of calculation in his eyes as he regarded the substantial total. Outside the restaurant, as we waited for the valet to bring our respective cars, I turned to my son in the cool evening air. I meant what I said about the educational trusts being a significant gift, I told him quietly. But the greatest gift I can give you and your children isn't money, Gregory. It's the understanding that happiness and worth aren't determined by addresses or labels or exclusive affiliations. I wish I'd made that clearer when you were growing up. He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his expression. You know, Mom, he said finally, sometimes I think I don't know you at all anymore. Perhaps you're just seeing parts of me that were always there, but muted, I suggested. Cancer has a way of burning away pretense, of clarifying what matters. The valet arrived with my Audi, sparing Gregory the need to respond. I thanked him for dinner, accepted his dutiful kiss on my cheek, and drove away into the velvety Boston night, leaving my son standing on the curb looking after me with that same puzzled expression, as if trying to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the woman who had emerged from illness with both wealth and boundaries intact. Summer bloomed across Boston, transforming the city with lush greenery and brilliant flowers. My rooftop garden became a sanctuary where I spent peaceful mornings with coffee and books, watching the sunrise paint the skyline in gold and rose. The bookstore flourished beyond our projections, developing a loyal clientele who appreciated our carefully curated selection and the warm, inviting atmosphere Miranda had helped create. My health continued to improve, each follow-up appointment confirming that the cancer remained in remission. Life settled into new rhythms, filled with purpose and genuine pleasure. I joined a book club that met monthly at Fabled Pages, making friends who knew nothing of my past or my financial status, women who valued me for my insights and humor rather than what I might provide. I enrolled in a watercolor class at the nearby senior center, discovering a modest talent that brought me unexpected joy. I volunteered twice weekly at a literacy program for immigrant children, my librarian skills finding new purpose in helping young minds discover the magic of reading in their adopted language. My relationship with Gregory remained cordial but distant. The educational trusts had been finalized with the amendment he'd requested, but he seemed to be nursing a quiet resentment over my refusal to consider funding a new home. Vanessa was even cooler, her texts about the children becoming increasingly perfunctory. They brought Zoe and Caleb to the bookstore's children's events occasionally, but declined my invitations for them to spend weekends at my condominium. The children, however, maintained their enthusiasm for our relationship. Zoe called regularly on her tablet, eager to share school projects and art creations. Caleb and I developed a ritual of reading together via video chat, taking turns with pages of whatever chapter book we were exploring. These digital connections weren't the same as the physical presence I craved, but they bridged the distance their parents had established. In late July, an unexpected opportunity arose. Gregory called on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but we have a situation," he began without preamble. Vanessa's mother was supposed to take the children next week while we're at a conference in Chicago, but she's just canceled, some issue with her hip acting up. "I'm so sorry to hear that," I said, genuinely concerned for both Vanessa's mother and their childcare dilemma. "When do you leave?" "Sunday morning," he sighed. The timing couldn't be worse. It's an important industry event, and Vanessa's scheduled to speak on a panel about marketing strategies for sustainable brands. "I'd be happy to stay with Zoe and Caleb," I offered immediately. "Either at your house or they could come here." There was a brief hesitation. "You're sure? It would be for 5 days, Sunday through Thursday." "Of course I'm sure," I said, already mentally rearranging my schedule. "It would be my pleasure. The bookstore runs itself these days with Miranda at the helm, and I have no other commitments that can't be postponed." "That's incredibly helpful," Gregory said, relief evident in his voice. "They'd probably be more comfortable at home with their routines and activities." "Then I'll pack a bag and be there Sunday morning," I promised. "What time do you leave for the airport?" We sorted the logistics quickly, Gregory's gratitude becoming more effusive as he realized I was genuinely eager to help, rather than viewing it as an imposition. When we hung up, I found myself smiling at the unexpected gift. 5 full days with my grandchildren, unfiltered by their parents' careful management of our interactions. I arrived at Gregory's house early Sunday as planned. A small suitcase containing my essentials and a larger bag filled with books, art supplies, and games I thought the children might enjoy. Vanessa greeted me at the door, already dressed for travel in a tailored pantsuit and heels that seemed excessive for a flight but perfectly in character. "Florence, thank you again for doing this," she said, ushering me inside. "The children's schedules are on the refrigerator. Zoe has art camp in the mornings and Caleb has soccer 3 afternoons. The rest is fairly flexible." "We'll manage beautifully," I assured her, setting my bags in the guest room. A proper one this time, not the converted playroom where I'd spent my cancer recovery. "Don't worry about a thing. Enjoy the conference." Gregory appeared, herding the children downstairs for goodbyes. Zoe was openly excited about my stay, while Caleb seemed torn between enthusiasm and anxiety about his parents' departure. After final hugs and reminders about medications and emergency contacts, they were gone. The house suddenly quiet save for the distant hum of the air conditioning. "Well," I said, looking at my grandchildren with a smile, "what shall we do first?" The next 5 days unfolded in a delightful pattern that balanced the children's scheduled activities with spontaneous adventures. I drove Zoe to art camp each morning, using the free hours to either take Caleb on special Just Us outings or to work remotely on bookstore business. Afternoons brought soccer for Caleb, where I cheered from the sidelines with a pride that felt almost physical in its intensity. Evenings were for cooking together, board games, reading aloud, and long conversations about everything from butterfly migrations to the possibility of life on other planets. Throughout it all, I observed my grandchildren with fresh eyes, noting details their parents might have missed in the rush of daily life. How Zoe grew quiet and withdrawn after art camp, reluctant to share her creations despite the teacher's effusive praise. How Caleb's enthusiasm for soccer seemed forced, his relief palpable when practices ended. How both children relaxed visibly, when allowed to choose their own activities rather than following the carefully structured enrichment their parents typically provided. On our 3rd evening, after Caleb had gone to bed, Zoe lingered in the kitchen, helping me prepare a fruit salad for the next day's breakfast. She worked methodically, cutting strawberries into precise pieces with the concentration of a surgeon. "Grandma," she said suddenly, not looking up from her task, "why don't you and Dad like each other anymore?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you think we don't like each other, sweetheart?" She shrugged one thin shoulder. "You used to visit all the time, and now you don't. And Dad gets a weird face when your name comes up, like he ate something sour. And Mom always changes the subject when I talk about your bookstore or your new house." I set down my knife, giving her my full attention. "Your dad and I are going through a complicated time," I said carefully. "Sometimes adults have disagreements about important things, even when they love each other very much." "Is it about money?" she asked, her perception startling me again. "Because Caleb said he heard Dad telling Mom that you're rich now but won't help them buy a bigger house." Ooh, I suppressed a sigh at Gregory's carelessness in having such conversations within earshot of his children. "It's partly about money," I acknowledged, seeing no point in lying to this perceptive child. "But it's more about values, about what we think is truly important in life." Zoe considered this, her small face serious. "Dad and Mom think important things are like having a big house and going to fancy schools and wearing the right clothes," she said. "But you think important things are different." "Yes," I said simply. "I think the most important things are kindness, curiosity, creativity, and genuine connection with others, things money can't buy." She nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "That's why I like being with you," she said. "You ask me what I think and how I feel. Mom and Dad just tell me what I should think and feel. My heart ached at the simple truth of her assessment. "What do you think about art camp?" I asked gently. "I've noticed you don't seem very excited about it." Zoe's shoulders slumped, slightly. "It's not real art," she confessed. "We just copy what the teacher does. Everyone's pictures look the same at the end. Mom says it's a prestigious program, but I liked my old art class better, where we could make whatever we wanted." "Ooh, and what about Whitfield Academy?" I ventured, seizing the opportunity. "Are you excited about starting there in September?" Her expression became guarded. "I guess. Mom says all the best families send their kids there, and I'll make the right kind of friends." "But what do you think?" I pressed. "Have you visited? Did it feel like a place where you'd be happy?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Mom says we'll tour it in August." Then, with a flash of her usual spirit, she added, "But I looked at their website. They wear uniforms every day, and they have to speak French in the dining hall, and there's no recess except for structured physical education." I listened as she continued detailing aspects of Whitfield that concerned her, struck by how many of her observations aligned with my own reservations about the school's rigid approach. When she'd finished, I pulled her into a gentle hug. "Thank you for sharing your thoughts with me," I said. "Your feelings about your school are really important. Would you like me to go with you when you tour Whitfield? Maybe we could visit some other schools too so you can compare." Her eyes widened. "Would Dad and Mom let you do that?" "I think they might," I said, making a mental note to invoke the consultation provisions of the Educational Trust at the YAFAR. Earliest opportunity. Sometimes adults need reminding to listen to children about decisions that affect their lives. The remainder of our time together passed too quickly. On Thursday evening, I prepared the children's favorite dinner, homemade macaroni and cheese with a side of roasted broccoli, knowing Gregory and Vanessa would return soon after the meal. As we finished eating, I presented each child with a small gift. For Zoe, a high-quality sketchbook and set of artist's pencils. For Caleb, a beautifully illustrated book about marine biology, a subject that had captivated him during a nature documentary we'd watched together. "Something to remember our special week," I told them as they exclaimed over their presents. "And a reminder that I'm always interested in what you create and what you learn, even when we're not together." Zoe clutched her sketchbook to her chest. "Next time we'll stay at your house, right? In our special room?" "I hope so," I said, not wanting to make promises I couldn't keep. "We'll have to see what your parents think." The sound of the garage door opening announced Gregory and Vanessa's return. The children rushed to greet them, bubbling with stories about our adventures. I followed more slowly, observing the family reunion with mixed emotions. Despite the weeks of distance, despite the tensions over money and values, these were still the people I loved most in the world. Whatever boundaries I needed to maintain with Gregory and Vanessa, whatever disappointments I felt in their choices, those feelings existed alongside an abiding love that couldn't be extinguished. "Mom," Gregory said, breaking away from the children's excited chatter to approach me. "Thank you for stepping in. It looks like everything went smoothly?" "We had a wonderful time," I assured him. "They're remarkable children, Gregory. You and Vanessa should be very proud." His expression softened slightly. "We are, though I'm not sure we can take credit for all their good qualities. Some of that comes from you." This unexpected acknowledgement warmed me. Perhaps. Nature, nurture, and just their own unique spirits, all playing their parts. Vanessa joined us, looking tired but satisfied after her conference. "The house is immaculate," she noted with surprise. "I was expecting at least some level of chaos after 5 days with a sitter." "Grandma's not a sitter," Caleb corrected indignantly. "She's family." An awkward silence followed this innocent but pointed observation. I smiled to ease the tension. "I've packed my things," I said. "Unless you'd like me to stay and hear about the conference over a cup of tea?" Gregory and Vanessa exchanged a quick glance. Actually, Gregory said, that would be nice. The kids should get ready for bed, but we could catch up afterward. This unexpected invitation suggested a potential thaw in our strained relations. While Vanessa supervised the children's bedtime routine, Gregory and I settled in the kitchen, with tea, discussing the highlights of his conference and the children's activities during his absence. Zoe mentioned you might accompany us when we tour Whitfield next month, he said casually, though I could tell the topic was anything but casual for him. I'd like to, I confirmed. The Educational Trust does specify my involvement in school selection. He nodded slowly. Yes, it does. And I've been thinking about what you said, about finding the right fit for each child's individual needs. Maybe we should look at a few alternatives to Whitfield, just to have a basis for comparison. This concession, small as it was, represented a significant shift in his thinking. I think that would be wise, I agreed. Zoe has some specific concerns about Whitfield's structure and approach that deserve consideration. Gregory looked surprised. She hasn't mentioned any concerns to us. Perhaps she didn't feel her opinion would matter, I suggested gently. Children are quite perceptive about when adults have already made up their minds. He absorbed this with a frown. We always tell the kids their opinions are important to us. Telling and showing are different things, I said. But she talked to me freely about her thoughts, and I believe she would with you too, if she felt you were genuinely open to her perspective. Our conversation continued as Vanessa rejoined us, the three of us cautiously navigating toward a more collaborative approach to the children's education. By the time I left that evening, we had tentatively agreed to visit 3 schools together, including Whitfield, with both children participating actively in the evaluation process. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Newton toward my condominium in the city, I reflected on the unexpected evolution of my relationship with Gregory and his family. What had begun as a painful rejection, being asked to leave their home the very day I'd learned my cancer was in remission, had ultimately led to a more authentic connection, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. My hidden fortune, once revealed, had forced a reckoning that might otherwise have never occurred. Gregory had seen me as a resource to be managed, a mother whose primary value lay in what she could provide. Cancer had shown me the hollowness of that relationship, and my financial independence had given me the means to establish healthier boundaries. The road ahead would not be smooth. Gregory and Vanessa's values remained fundamentally different. From mine, their social aspirations and material focus at odds with my simpler priorities. But we had found a bridge in our shared love for Zoe and Caleb, a common ground that transcended our differences. As I pulled into my building's garage, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. For my remission, for my financial security, for my beautiful new home and thriving business. But most of all, for the clarity that had come with confronting my mortality, the courage to finally live authentically, to express my values without apology, and to love my family without sacrificing my own worth in the process. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The school tours to arrange, the continuing negotiation of boundaries with Gregory and Vanessa, the seasonal adjustments at the bookstore as summer waned and fall approached. But tonight, I would climb the elevator to my peaceful sanctuary, pour a small glass of wine, and stand on my balcony watching the city lights shimmer across the river. This was my life now. Not perfect, not without complications or heartache, but genuinely mine. My son had kicked me out after my cancer treatment, never imagining I possessed the resources to not only survive, but thrive independently. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither was the lesson. True wealth had never been about the money I'd quietly accumulated. It had always been about the freedom to live according to my deepest values, to make choices based on love rather than fear, and to find joy in each day I was fortunate enough to experience. That was a fortune no one could take away, and one I hoped, in time, to share with those I loved most. not through checks or trust funds, but through the example of a life well lived on its own authentic terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.